Curtains drawn, the first days of mourning. You awaken to the muffled stillness of a Victorian house where the shutters are drawn tight against the daylight. The first thing you notice is the air itself, heavy, as though it has taken on the same somber shade as the crepe pinned across the mirrors. The glass is hidden, not because it has cracked, but because reflection in the days of mourning is thought improper. You are not supposed to glance at your own face, not while grief is so fresh. The floorboards creak faintly beneath your slippers as you rise. Somewhere in another room, a clock ticks with patient slowness, its pendulum swinging like a heartbeat too tired to rush. The faint smell of wax and damp stone hangs in the corridor. A neighbor once said that mourning houses always seem to smell like candle stubs and closed curtains, a scent halfway between comfort and suffocation. Before you begin the day, you are reminded of what must be worn. In the rules of Victorian mourning, the first duty is not prayer or work, but attire. You must put on black bombazine, a fabric stiff and unforgiving, designed less for comfort than for display. You slide the gown over your shoulders, its folds absorbing the light. The weight is physical, it pulls at you with every movement. You fasten the buttons slowly, each one like a quiet note in a dirge. Over your hands go gloves, dull and smooth, and over your face, a veil that makes even breathing an effort. The veil mists with your breath, a fog you carry with you, so the world is blurred and distant. Historians debate how strictly these rules were followed. Some records suggest the poorest widows could not afford bombazine at all, relying on dyed cotton instead. Others mention pawning household goods, just to obtain the right cloth. Etiquette books, however, made no allowance for poverty. They described full mourning dress as though it were as essential as bread itself. Miss Finch, your neighbour across the lane, has already made a point of peeking through her curtains to see whether you comply. She is a woman of habits. She waters her plants at precisely the wrong time of day, and she makes certain to note whether your veil reaches the proper length. You can almost hear her thinking, whispering her commentary to the silence of her parlour. You prepare to step outside. The doorway feels like a threshold not just of wood and brass, but of judgment. Do you greet the people who pass, or do you bow your head and hurry? Victorian etiquette is clear. A widow in first mourning is expected to decline most social contact, yet the milkman still expects payment, and the baker still expects orders. A mild dilemma forms. Should you answer his cheerful, "Good morning," or should you remain wrapped in silence, allowing him to wonder if he has been rude? The choice is yours, but either way, the weight of the veil makes conversation awkward. Your words escape muffled, like whispers behind curtains. The path to the churchyard is gravelly, each step crunching beneath your boots. The sound is strangely comforting in its repetition. The smell of damp grass mixes with faint smoke from distant chimneys. You pause at the gate, the iron cold beneath your gloved hand. You are not required to go today, but habit urges it. Widows often found themselves at gravesides in the first weeks, not only out of grief, but out of duty. The stone must not be neglected, the flowers must not droop. Even the silence of the graveyard feels regulated, as if it too belongs to etiquette. There are rules for the house as well. In the first days of mourning, mirrors are covered, but so are clocks in some traditions. Time itself is hidden, suspended, yet life persists. The servants, if you have them, move with quiet efficiency. Tea must be brewed, though it is bitter and cooling by the time you drink it. Bread must be cut, though you have no appetite. The routine persists, because stillness can only be endured when it is filled with motion. You sit by the fire, which hisses faintly as coal settles. You hear the rustle of paper, the first condolence letters arriving. The stationery is edged with black as required. One letter speaks politely of your loss, but devotes more lines to the weather and the health of distant relatives. Another letter is blotched with ink, as if written hastily without revision. Each letter requires a reply. The etiquette manuals state that even widows must respond, if only briefly. You consider whether to write at once or to wait until your hand steadies. The fire crackles softly as you weigh this decision. There are practical steps too, small rituals you are expected to observe. The veil must be kept lowered in public, never lifted before 3 months. Jewelry, if worn, must be jet black as polished coal. Gloves are not to be of shiny material. Matte black is most suitable. Conversation must be brief, polite, subdued. Invitations are to be declined, at least until the end of full mourning. The rules provide structure, even if they seem confining. They are a code, and codes can feel comforting when life itself has become uncertain. Later you return home and notice Mrs. Finch again at her window. She watches as you remove your veil and hang it carefully upon its hook. She is certain to comment tomorrow about whether you hung it too near the fire. You imagine her voice, Heat ruins the folds. She has never owned a mourning veil, but she repeats advice from magazines, as though they were commandments. Evening arrives quietly. The curtains remain drawn, though the lamp is lit. Its glow is faint, yellow, steady. You sip tea again, thinner now than in the morning. The spoon clinks gently against the cup. Outside, a cart rattles over cobblestones, then fades into silence. You sit back and feel the chair press against your shoulders. The dilemma of the evening is a small one. Whether to sew by lamplight or simply fold your hands and let the hours pass. Sewing risks eye strain, but idle time risks a restless mind. Victorian widows often occupied themselves with needlework during mourning, each stitch a soft distraction from the weight of time. Some scholars note that this quiet busyness was less about grief and more about survival. To appear industrious was to reassure neighbors that mourning had not tipped into madness. Even stillness had to be structured. The hours drift, unmeasured. You hear the faint scurry of a mouse between the walls, the sigh of the coal fire as it burns low, the groan of the old house settle. Each sound is familiar, softened by repetition, until they no longer disturb but rather soothe. When you finally prepare to retire, you fold your gown neatly, place the gloves upon the table, and unpin the veil with slow precision. The garments themselves feel like rituals, symbols as much as fabric. The room is cooler now and the air carries the faint smell of soot from the fire. You slide beneath the weight of the covers, and the mattress creaks its reply. You lie in the stillness, aware of the quiet discipline of your first days as a widow in Victorian England. The fire fades to embers, the curtains do not stir, the night holds you gently, without demand, without urgency, and as the house sighs into silence, you drift into uneasy rest. The ritual of dress and display. You wake to another morning in the house that seems dimmer than it once was. The curtains are still drawn, and the air is still faintly stale with coal smoke from last night's fire. The sound of a cart on the street rattles through the window panes, but you do not rise to look. Your first thought, as it has been each morning, is of the attire that will carry you through the day. The ritual of dress is not an indulgence, nor an act of vanity. It is a duty. In Victorian England, it was believed that mourning must be displayed outwardly, not merely felt within. Grief was not considered private, it was something to be worn like a uniform. You stand from your bed and reach for the garments prepared the night before. The gown is black bombazine, heavy and matte, a fabric that seems to drink in the lamplight. The smell of starch lingers faintly from yesterday's pressing. You lift the gown and let it fall against you, the cloth whispering with each fold. The sleeves are stiff, and as you button them you feel the pull of fabric against your skin. Each button is small, carved from jet, cold to the touch. Your hands tremble only slightly as you fasten them, but the motion feels endless. It is said that some widows required the help of a maid just to complete the task each morning. Today you do it alone. Once the gown is secure, you step to the dressing table. The mirror is still veiled, but you know the routine without sight. The gloves come next. They are smooth kid leather, dyed black, their surface faintly creaking as your fingers press into them. They dull the warmth of touch, separating you from the world as though grief itself were a barrier. Then the bonnet, its brim heavy with crepe. At last, you lower it, and the room blurs instantly. Even the glow of the lamp softens into haze. Breathing beneath the veil is like breathing through damp linen. The air grows warm, and your own breath fogs around you. The ritual of dressing is complete, but it is also incomplete, for each step has unspoken rules. Etiquette books of the period outlined them sternly. The gown must be black, without sheaths. Should be worn outdoors and never raised before 3 months' time. Gloves must match in color and texture. No contrast was acceptable. Jewelry, if worn, should be jet, onyx or hairwork mementos. Bonnets and caps must be subdued. Feathers were forbidden in deep mourning. To fail in these rules was not simply a matter of fashion, it was to invite gossip, and gossip, in Victorian neighborhoods, was as persistent as smoke in winter. Mrs. Finch, your neighbor, is already at her window. She tilts her head like a bird observed. Yesterday she remarked that your veil seemed to lift too high in the breeze. Today she is likely considering whether your gloves are matte enough. She waters her potted geraniums, though they look as weary of her watchfulness as you are. As you step into the street, the ritual continues. Pedestrians glance once, then avert their eyes as if your attire carries with it an aura of solemnity. Some cross the street quietly, not to avoid you but to avoid the discomfort of deciding whether to offer condolence. You hear the soft tap of your boots on stone, the muffled rhythm carrying you forward. The veil blurs the shop fronts, but you know them by memory. The baker with his warm loaves, the apothecary with jars lined like soldiers, the draper whose bolts of fabric gleam in faint colors you are no longer permitted to wear. You pause at the draper's window, remembering the myth that all widows possessed ample funds for such garments. In reality, many struggled. Records show women pawning wedding rings or family clocks simply to afford bombazine. The fabric was costly, and yet it was expected to appear in ordinary cotton, dyed clumsily black, marked one as pitiable, almost improper. You pass by a seamstress's door. Inside, young women bend over sewing tables, needles flashing. They stitch yards of crepe that will cover hats, coats, and even doorknobs. One of them lifts her head briefly, her face pale in the gaslight, then returns to her work without expression. For her, your veil is not a symbol of grief but of business. When you return home, you remove the veil carefully. It must not be folded harshly, or it will crease in a way that looks careless. There is a method to storing it. Unpin the veil slowly, avoiding tears in the fabric. Lay it flat upon a clean cloth, smoothing wrinkles with the back of the hand. Allow it to rest away from heat, for firelight can warp the folds. Store it beneath tissue away from dust, but not pressed so tightly that it loses drape. These steps sound simple, but they require patience. To fail is to risk ridicule when the veil hangs uneven, and ridicule in mourning is more cutting than in ordinary dress. Later, you sit by the fire. The smell of coal clings to your gown, mixing with the faint aroma of wool. You consider whether to polish the jet brooch left from yesterday. It is small, carved with leaves, cool to your touch. Some widows carried lockets with hairwork inside, small strands woven into intricate designs. You wonder whether such tokens comfort or weigh down the heart further. Evening grows, and the lamp hums faintly. The veil rests upon its hook, the gown across the chair, ready for tomorrow's repetition. You sip thin tea, the taste flat, stretched from leaves reused too many times. The house sighs, boards settling. A dilemma returns, whether to continue following the rules so precisely, or to allow yourself some comfort. Would anyone truly notice if your gloves had a Would the world end if your bonnet held a small feather, discreet and dark? Yet you imagine Mrs. Finch leaning forward at her window, her lips forming silent judgment, and so the ritual persists. Tomorrow, and the day after, and the weeks beyond. Each morning begins with the same weight of bombazine, the same blur of veil, the same slow parade of duty through narrow streets. As the fire dwindles to a soft glow, you lean back in the chair. The garments await you, folded in patience. The night presses close, steady and dull, carrying you once again into rest. Letters and condolences. You sit in the quiet parlor, the faint smell of coal dust still hanging in the air from the morning fire. The house feels heavier than usual, as though its walls lean in with expectation. You hear it then, the faint metallic rattle of the gate outside, followed by the shuffle of footsteps along the garden path. The postman, his boots thudding with steady rhythm, approaches your door. The sound is ordinary, but now, in mourning, it feels amplified. Every letter he carries has the weight of ritual. The knock is soft, polite. A pause, then another tap. You rise slowly, smoothing the folds of bombazine from yesterday. Your gloves creak faintly as you turn the hand. He nods once, avoids your eyes, and places a small stack into your gloved hand. His fingers brush yours briefly, warm, calloused, before he retreats without words. Even he seems subdued, as though to speak cheerfully would be out of place. The letters are edged in black. That thin line around the paper is the border of your days now, a frame for every word you will read in these months. You hold them carefully, almost ceremonially, and close the door. The house swallows you again in its silence. You place the letters on the table beside the lamp. The faint smell of ink and sealing wax rises as you untie the stack. You notice the handwriting, some neat, some hurried, some blotched by rain. Before you open them, you pause, feeling the tension of ritual. In Victorian England, letters of condolence were both duty and display. They were not always written out of deep feeling, but they were required. To fail to send one was considered a lapse in social decency. To receive them was to collect not only sympathy, but proof that society recognized your mourning. You begin with the largest envelope. Its seal is cracked with care, not haste. You slit it open with a knife, the paper resisting faintly before yielding. The letter unfolds stiffly, and you read. The words are formal. We were deeply saddened to hear of your loss. Mr. Such and Such was a gentleman of good character. We trust you will find strength in your faith and in the comfort of friends. The sentences march like soldiers, each one proper, each one predictable. You nod faintly, though no one sees. You fold the letter again and set it aside. The next envelope is smaller, the handwriting cracked. Inside, blotches of ink spread like stains on cloth. I hardly know what to say. I wish I could ease your burden, though words fail me. The weather here has turned damp,
and the rheumatism in my joints grows worse. It drifts from condolence into the writer's own troubles, a common pattern. Victorians often used mourning letters to slip in their own ailments, as though sorrow opened the door for shared complaints. You sigh softly, and place it beside the first, then another. This one is from Cousin Edwin. His script is long, winding, without margin. You scan a few lines, and though it is a tragedy for you, it reminds me of my own difficulties last year when I misplaced my accounts. The letter sprawls across the page, less about your loss than about his own inconvenience. Edwin has a talent for inserting himself into every event, as though the world itself circles his small orbit. You fold it perhaps more tightly than necessary, and set it aside. The pile grows. At last you reach one written with delicate, careful hand. The paper is faintly scented, lavender pressed into its folds. I remember the afternoon last spring when he spoke of planting roses by the south wall. I shall always think of that when the blossoms appear. I share in your sorrow, and though words are poor company, I offer them nonetheless. You linger on these lines longer than the others. This letter remembers him as more than a name in black ink. It is perhaps the only one you will reread. The etiquette manuals say each letter must be answered. They are precise in their instructions. Steps for replying to condolence. Letters step her. Always use black-edged stationery during the mourning period. Begin with a brief expression of gratitude. Never elaborate. Avoid dwelling on your sorrow. Keep words restrained. Close with a phrase of faith or endurance. Never despair. Sign simply without flourishes, as humility is required. To skip replies would mark you as neglectful, even discourteous, and yet some scholars suggest widows often let the pile linger, answering only a few. Surviving bundles in archives show gaps, letters received but no replies preserved. Perhaps silence itself was a form of reply. You gather your own writing materials. The ink smells sharp, metallic. You dip the nib carefully, watching the dark bead form at its tip. The first words come slowly. I thank you for your kind expression of sympathy. You pause, the letters uneven. Your hand trembles faintly. The veil of bombazine at your sleeve brushes against the paper, leaving a shadowy crease. You continue, but each line feels like sewing with coarse thread, necessary, but uncomfortable. You fold the page carefully. Another rule: the fold must be precise, creased with the back of the hand, never sloppy. You place it into its envelope, black bordered, and press the flap. A seal of wax is applied, the faint scent of resin rising as it cools. The letter is complete, one of many still to be written. A dilemma forms quietly. Do you reply to Cousin Edwin's rambling complaint? His letter demands no answer, yet etiquette insists you cannot ignore family. Do you thank him for reminding you of his misplaced accounts? Or do you leave the letter folded, silent, forgotten in the pile? There is no urgency, only a decision that will settle one way or another in its own time. You rise from the table. The afternoon light is thin through the curtain. You hear the creak of the neighbor's window. Mrs. Finch peers again, watering her geraniums with exaggerated care. She squints, perhaps trying to guess whether the letters you received were many or few. Tomorrow she will remark in the butcher's shop that the postman lingered at your door. She may even speculate whether your replies will be prompt. Her observations are endless, her judgments quiet but persistent. The hours pass in small motions. You write a line, seal an envelope, then pause. The fire needs tending. The kettle sighs. The house groans in its own slow rhythm. At one point you hear the distant ring of the church bell, a single note carried on the damp air. Historians note that Victorian condolence culture was as much about appearances as about comfort. To display grief correctly was to assure others of your stability, your respectability. Records suggest that even poor widows bought single sheets of black-edged paper, writing short replies just to fulfill the form. Silence risked gossip. A widow's handwriting was in a way her public face. Night falls gradually. You have answered 3 letters, though 10 remain. Your hand aches faintly. Your ink runs low. You set the pen aside. The letters rest in a neat pile, edges aligned, as if order itself could quiet sorrow. The lamp hums, its flame steady, casting long shadows across the table. You lean back, the chair pressing against your shoulder. The air smells faintly of smoke and lavender still lingering from that one letter. Outside, a cart rattles away down the street, fading into silence. You close your eyes briefly, and for a moment, you feel the letters themselves breathe with the rhythm of the house. The fire crackles softly. As the night grows colder, you wake once more to morning light dimmed by curtains. Another knock at the gate. The postman again. More envelopes edged in black. You repeat the ritual. Open, read, fold, reply. The cycle turns without haste, without urgency. only with quiet inevitability. A new dilemma, whether to send thank yous immediately, or to let them wait until Sunday. The manuals suggest promptness, but your hand protests. You compromise 2 today, 2 tomorrow. The rhythm is slow, acceptable. Mrs. Finch of course peers from her window, noting the postman's frequency. Cousin Edwin sends yet another letter, this time on financial advice. You must consider investing in the new railway shares, though in your position caution is advisable. You fold it quickly, uncertain whether to laugh or sigh. His letters are less condolence than instruction manuals for his own anxieties, and yet the ritual persists. You brew tea, thinner with each use of the leaves. You dip the pen, write the careful phrases, fold the edges with precision. Your world narrows to paper, ink and etiquette. Each line written is less about communication and more about surviving the gaze of others. Historians examining archives find bundles of such letters, stacked neatly, tied with ribbon, preserved for decades. To modern eyes they seem repetitive, formal, almost meaningless. Yet they were records of belonging. Each letter meant that someone had noticed, that your mourning had not gone unseen. By evening the table is scattered with wax drips, ink smudges, and folded envelopes. You feel the fatigue of repetition, but also a faint calm. The order of it lulls you, the steps of etiquette moving like clockwork. The lamplight dims, the fire hisses low. You set aside the pen, and let your hands rest in your lap. Outside the street is quiet, save for the faint cry of a distant vendor closing shop. The letters will wait. They always do. The sea of black edges gathers on your table, patient as the ticking clock. The night draws close, and you drift again, not into urgent dreams, but into the slow grey tide of rest. The house that echoes. You rise in the morning to a silence that feels layered, like dust upon dust. The curtains remain drawn, the air faint with last night's fire, and the rooms of the house seem to wait for you to begin the day. As a widow in Victorian England, your home has become both refuge and burden. The house is not empty, yet it echoes with absence. Each sound you make feels larger than it is, each silence longer than it should be. The first sound you hear is the groan of the floorboards beneath your slippers. They creak with every step, as though reminding you that the house has its own voice, one that repeats itself endlessly. You light the fire with stiff motions, the coal giving off a faint hiss as it takes. The air grows warmer, but only slightly. You feel the texture of soot along the hearth, the grit of ash brushing against your gloved fingertips. The day begins not with conversation but with routine. In mourning, routine is both anchor and burden. You prepare the kettle, setting it on the trivet, listening to the slow rise of steam. The sound fills the silence like a clock ticking, patient, unhurried. You take out the teacups, though you will drink alone. Their faint clink is another echo in the quiet house. The ritual of dusting. Dusting becomes one of your morning occupations. It is not simply about cleanliness, it is about keeping your hands busy. You move slowly from shelf to shelf, lifting porcelain figures, wiping their bases, replacing them in precisely the same spot. You feel the texture of the cloth, slightly damp with water, sweeping over surfaces where a fine grey film collects. The smell of old wood rises as you dust the edges of the mantel. Victorian manuals advised widows to maintain strict order in their homes, suggesting that neatness reflected moral steadiness. Myth and reality diverge here. Records suggest that many widows, overwhelmed, allowed dust to gather and furniture to sag. Yet in middle-class homes, a widow was expected to preserve appearances. You polish the glass of a cabinet, though its contents remain faint behind the curtain. You move onto the table, its surface scarred with faint scratches from years of use. Dusting is not a task with an end. The dust will return, but the repetition is a comfort, and repetition is what carries you through the days. The fire crackles softly as the morning stretches on. Inventory of linens. Another routine awaits. Once every few weeks, a Victorian widow might inspect her linens, keeping count of sheets, towels and tablecloth. You open the chest in the bedroom. The smell of lavender sashes drifts up, mingled with faint mildew from damp corners. You lift each folded piece, unfold, inspect, refold. Step by step you proceed. Tapien. Remove each sheet from the chest, and shake it gently. Hold it to the light, checking for thinning patches or fraying seams. Fold the corners sharply, pressing them down with your palm. Stack in order of use, those most worn at the top, the newest at the bottom. Record the count neatly in a ledger, using black-edged paper if still in mourning. The rhythm of folding linen is slow and steady, the sound of cloth whispering against itself. You place each back into the chest, pressing down gently to make room for the rest. The lid closes with a soft thump, sealing the scent of lavender inside again. A house too large. The rooms feel wider now, as though the absence of another presence has stretched their wall. The parlor where voices once rose is now filled only with the ticking of a clock. The dining room holds a table too long for one. Even the staircase groans more loudly without a second set of steps upon it. You consider whether to close off certain rooms. Many widows did so, draping sheets over furniture, shutting doors, limiting their lives to a few spaces. It was practical, less to heat, less to clean, but it also made the house feel like a museum of absence, corridors of silence behind locked doors, a dilemma for, do you keep the rooms open, letting the echoes remind you of what once was, or do you close them, reducing the house to a smaller, manageable shape? Either choice carries its own weight, its own silence. Mrs. Finch of course will have her opinion. She will remark to her friends at the grocer's that it is wasteful to heat unused rooms, or perhaps that it is morbid to keep them locked. Her voice will find its way through the walls even when she does not step inside. The idea of lodgers. Historians note that many Victorian widows took in boarders to ease financial strain. A room let out to a clerk or a student could provide income, but also intrusion. To invite another into your house was to exchange privacy for security. The myth of the solitary widow in her empty house is only half true. Records of census returns show rows of widows listed with lodger beneath their roof. You imagine the sound of footsteps not your own on the stair, the scrape of a chair at the table, the cough of another voice in the hall. Would it comfort or disturb? Would the presence of another body banish the echo, or simply remind you of what you have lost? You boil the kettle again and sip tea, weaker now, its taste fading. The thought lingers. Small repairs. The house requires constant tending. You notice the fray of curtains near the window, the wobble of a chair leg, the dimness of a lamp chimney clouded with soot. You fetch the oilcloth, rub it against the glass, clearing the residue. You tilt the chair, adjust the joint, tighten with a small wedge of wood. Each task is simple, but each holds back decay for another day.
Step by step you maintain the house takeover. Stir the fire, coaxing the embers with the poker. Brush the hearth, sweeping ash into the pan. Baker rub brass fittings with a rag until they catch faint light. Mend small tears in fabric with careful stitches. Replaced spent lamp wicks, trimming them evenly. These motions, repeated, fill the hours. They do not erase the echo, but they soften it. Cousin Edwin's advice. A letter arrives again from Cousin Edwin. His words fill 2 sheets this time, though his sympathy is brief. Most of his ink is devoted to advising you on how best to manage the property. You must consider renting out your upper rooms. It is quite the fashion in certain quarters. Do not let sentiment prevent practicality. His letters, though pompous, raise a truth. To remain alone in a large house is costly. Coal, candles, food, all consume without pause. You fold his letter, place it with the others, and sit in thought. The fire crackles softly as you weigh this decision. The echo of evening. As night approaches, the house grows louder in its quietness. The boards creak, the pipes groan, the clock ticks with slow insistence. Each sound is magnified by absence. You hear the drip of water in the scullery, the flutter of a curtain in the draught, the faint scurry of a mouse between the walls. You light the lamps one by one. Their glow pushes back shadows, but cannot fill the space. The rooms seem too wide, too tall, their ceilings stretching into gloom. You sit with your sewing, the needles slipping through fabric, the thread drawing tight. The rhythm is steady, soothing, yet even in this rhythm, the house echoes. Each click of the needle seems louder than it should. Each sigh of your breath becomes a sound that fills the space. You realize that in widowhood, even silence speaks. Cadence closing, the fire fades to embers, the lamps dim. You rise, fold your sewing and place it neatly aside. You walk the corridor, checking each door, each window, each latch. The house groans softly, as though acknowledging your care. You lie in bed, the mattress creaking beneath you. The curtain stirs faintly with a draught. The house does not sleep, but it rests with you, its echoes wrapping around your breathing. The night grows deeper, and you drift once more into uneasy rest. The church and the graveyard. You wake to a morning that feels both familiar and strange. The curtains are drawn, as they have been for weeks, yet the air carries the faint toll of a distant bell. The sound seeps into the room like a reminder, low and resonant. Today is Sunday, or perhaps only a weekday visit. But either way, the path to the church and graveyard waits for you. You move through the small rituals of preparation. The kettle set on the fire, the faint hiss of water beginning to steam, the cup of tea sipped without much flavor. Then you dress carefully. The bombazine gown is heavy in your hands. The gloves are cool, faintly creaking as you pull them on. At last the veil, lowered so the world becomes blurred. Breathing beneath it is warm, slightly suffocating. The ritual is never quick, never light. It is deliberate, a uniform of grief. The walk to the church. You step into the street. The air is damp, carrying the smell of coal smoke and morning frost. Your boots crunch against gravel. The veil mists faintly with your breath, softening the outlines of houses and shop fronts. The sound of a cart rattles in the distance. The driver's whip cracking faintly. Neighbors glance, then avert their eyes. The sight of a widow in full mourning is not unusual, but it is always observed. The path to the church takes you past Mrs. Finch's house. Of course she is at the window, watering her geraniums, as though the plants required attention every hour. She tilts her head slightly, lips pressed, as if to measure whether your veil hangs to the proper length. You keep your gaze lowered, boots steady on the stones. The air smells faintly of wet earth and chimney soot. You reach the lich gate of the churchyard. The iron latch is cold beneath your glove. The gate swings open with a soft groan. The hinges stiff. The gravel path continues, but now it is joined by the soft caw of rooks in the trees and the damp smell of moss clinging to gravestone. Each stone leans slightly, worn by weather, the names half faded. The silence here is not absolute. It is filled with small sounds. The rustle of leaves, the distant crack of a branch, the faint tolling of a bell. Ritual of tending the grave. The first duty is always at the grave itself. You approach the mound of earth, the stone newly set, the inscription still sharp against the grey. The flowers left earlier have begun to fade, their petals curl inward, edges browned. You kneel carefully, the fabric of your gown pressing into damp grass. There is a procedure to tending a Victorian grave, one observed almost like prayer. Remove the old flowers, shaking away soil clinging to stems. Brush away fallen leaves or moss from the inscription, tracing the carved letters gently. Replace with fresh flowers, lilies if you can afford them, ivy if you cannot. Straighten any small stones or markers placed at the edge. Stand back, veil lowered, hands folded, and remain a moment in silence. The smell of earth rises around you, damp and steady. Your gloves are speckled faintly with soil, though you brush them clean against the grass. You stand again, the veil shifting in the breeze. The air feels cooler here, as though the shade of trees and stone has settled upon you. Inside the church, the bell tolls again, calling the congregation. You step toward the wooden door, its iron handle worn smooth by generations. Inside, the air is colder than outside, heavy with the smell of stone, wax and faint incense from last week's service. The sound of your boots on flagstones echoes soft. Widows are expected to sit with quiet dignity, neither too far forward, nor too far back. You choose a pew along the side, the wood polished by countless hands. You lower yourself carefully, arranging your gown so it does not wrinkle. The veil remains down, though it blurs the minister's face into a pale shape against the pulpit. Mrs. Finch is 2 pews behind, whispering faintly to a neighbor. You cannot hear her words, but you can sense their shape. Perhaps she remarks on whether you should be here so soon, or whether your gloves are too new. Whispering in church is as constant as the ticking of clocks. The minister begins. His voice is steady, rising and falling like a tide. You do not need to listen to every word. The rhythm itself is enough. The psalms are sung slowly, the organ droning low. You mouth the words beneath your veil, though the sound barely escapes. Around you the congregation shifts, coughs, clears throats, rustles paper. The sound of many people trying to be silent is itself a kind of music. Myth versus reality. Etiquette books of the time insisted widows should attend church regularly, displaying piety and humility. Yet records show many did not. Some avoided services to escape scrutiny, others because the cost of clothing made appearance uncomfortable. Parish registers reveal widows appearing less often than expected. The myth of constant attendance served society's expectations more than reality. Still, to appear today feels necessary. To miss too many Sundays might invite comment, and comment is as sharp as cold wind. The graveyard after service. After service the congregation disperses. You step outside again into the churchyard, where families linger among the graves. The smell of damp grass mixes with the faint aroma of bread carried from a basket. Children dart between stones,
their laughter oddly sharp against the silence. You return to the grave, checking that the flowers remain arranged. The stone seems colder now, the letters sharp. You stand a while, though the minutes stretch like hours. At last you turn to leave. The gravel crunches again beneath your boots, steady, unhurried. Dilemmas of devotion. As you walk, you consider small dilemmas that repeat themselves. Should you visit the grave daily, or only on Sunday? Too often, and it may seem excessive. Too rarely, and it may seem neglectful. Should you accept the vicar's invitation to tea, or decline as etiquette suggests in early morning? To accept could be seen as unseemly. To decline could be seen as cold. Should you sit always in the same pew, or vary? Some say consistency shows devotion. Others whisper it shows rigidity. Each choice is small, yet each weighs upon you. Victorian society turned even silence into performance. Cousin Edwin's commentary. Another letter arrives that week, this time filled with advice on religious conduct. Cousin Edwin writes, "Attendance at church is most necessary for appearances, though I myself find sermons tedious. Still, one must be. I advise punctuality, for nothing looks worse than a widow late to the pew." You fold the letter, lips pressed faintly. He offers instructions for every part of your life, though his own attendance at church has always been irregular. Still, he insists upon your. You place the letter aside, adding it to the growing pile. Cadence closing, evening prayer. As the day ends, you light the lamp in the parlor. Its glow is faint, yellow against the curtains. You kneel by the chair, hands folded, whispering prayers not in hope of reply but in rhythm of habit. The fire hisses as coal shifts, the sound soft and steady. The house around you is silent, but the echo of bells lingers in your ears. The smell of damp moss clings faintly to your gown. You close your eyes and the image of the graveyard returns. Stones leaning, trees swaying, names half hidden. The lamp dims, the fire softens, the night settles, and you drift once more into rest as the echo of the church bell fades into the distance. Money, work and quiet struggle. The house is still when you wake, but the quiet is not restful. It is the quiet of bills unpaid, of coal running low, of cupboards that hold more shadows than food. Widowhood in Victorian England was never just about grief. It was also about arithmetic, coins counted in the palm, rations stretched to last another week, and small decisions that felt larger than they appeared. The morning begins with the fire, or rather the lack of it. You stir the embers from last night and find only a thin glow. The coal scuttle holds a few small lumps, not enough for a hearty blaze. You arrange them carefully, laying ash forward, coaxing the fire with a patience born of necessity. The hiss of flame rises faintly, weakly, then steadies into a small. The room warms only slightly, but it will have to do. The kettle is placed on the trivet. The water inside is thin, not filled to the brim. Tea leaves are used again, a third or fourth steeping. The taste is flat, but warmth is more important than flavor. You drink slowly, holding the cup between gloved hands. Even comfort must be rationed. The cost of widowhood. Historians note that widowhood was often a financial condition, as much as a social one. Some widows were provided for through pensions, inheritances or family support. Others had little but what they could earn themselves. The myth of the widow in dignified poverty, living quietly but securely, was only partly true. In reality, many women slipped into hardship. Charity records in towns list widows applying for coal tickets, bread doles or parish relief. You are not yet desperate, but the arithmetic grows louder each week. Stretching the coal rations. There is an order to making coal last. Victorian manuals sometimes gave instructions, though experience was the real teacher. The steps are simple but stern. Stir the ashes forward with the poker, exposing the hidden glow. Lay small cinders across the embers, building a bridge that holds heat. Add a thin layer of coal, never too much at once. Weight smothers the fire. Close the vent slightly, letting the fire breathe slowly rather than burn quickly. Sit close to the hearth, using shawls and layers to make up for what the flames cannot give. The fire hisses as you follow the step. You place your chair near, holding your hands out to the faint warmth. The smell of soot clings to your gown, a constant reminder that comfort is never free. Mrs. Finch from her window would surely remark if smoke did not rise from your chimney. She would speculate in the butcher's shop about whether you had failed to tend the fire properly. Even your poverty would become her entertainment. Needlework and small incomes. The afternoon brings work. Many widows earned through needlework, stitching shirts for shops or mending for neighbors. The pay was slight, but the occupation respectable. You sit by the window where light is best, needle in hand, thread drawn through cloth. The sound is soft, steady, needle piercing, thread pulling, cloth sighing. Step by step you mend, thread the needle with black cotton, knotting the end tightly, fold the fabric along its tier, edges meeting neatly, insert the needle, pull the thread, repeat with calm rhythm. Smooth the seam with your gloved hand, pressing it flat, stack the finished piece carefully, ready to return. Each stitch is small but together they fill the hours. The work does not enrich, but it sustains. It gives the day shape as though poverty can be managed with neat seam. Dilemmas of survival. The house holds reminders of better days, jewelry in a box, silver cutlery in a drawer, a clock that ticks more proudly than your purse allows. You wonder, should you sell one of these things? A ring perhaps, or a brooch. The money would last weeks, perhaps months, but once sold it is gone, and memory goes with it. A dilemma: cling to heirlooms and risk hunger, or let them go for bread and coal. Many widows faced this choice. Records of pawnbrokers show steady business from black-clad women carrying rings or watches. Objects of sentiment became objects of necessity. Cousin Edwin, in his latest letter, urges you to consider small investments instead. He writes, "A widow must think of her future, not dwell in the past." Shares in the railway promise steady return. His words seem far removed from your reality. Chairs do not boil kettles, nor do they mend gowns. You fold his letter, and place it with the others. Work beyond the home. Not all widows remained confined to needlework. Some opened small shops, selling sweets or bread from their front rooms. Others took in washing, filling their houses with the smell of soap and damp linen. In industrial towns, widows found employment in factories, though the hours were long and the pay meager. You imagine yourself as a shopkeeper, standing behind a counter, measuring sugar into paper cones. The thought is almost pleasant, though the labor would be constant. You imagine the smell of starch if you were to take in washing, steam rising, hands raw from scrubbing. Each possibility carries weight. Mrs. Finch no doubt would disapprove of a widow lowering herself to trade, yet she would also disapprove of a widow who did not earn. Her judgment is as inexhaustible as coal is scarce. The rules of economy. Victorian widows often lived by unwritten codes of frugality. You think of them as you move through the day. Never waste coal when a shawl will suffice. Never buy new cloth when old can be patched. Never let food spoil. Stretch each crust and scrap. Never refuse charity outright, but never appear eager for it. Always keep accounts neat, even if the numbers are small. These rules are not official, but they feel as binding as scripture. They give structure to struggle, predictability to what. Charity and stigma. One afternoon a knock comes at the door. A boy from the parish holds out a ticket, coal for the poor, distributed by the church. You hesitate. To accept is to admit need. To refuse is to risk cold. The boy waits, shifting on his feet. His hair is damp, his coat too thin. You take the ticket slowly, thanking him with a quiet word. Historians note that charity was both lifeline and stigma. Widows were expected to accept it, but also expected to appear ashamed of doing so. The balance was delicate. Too eager, and you were greedy. Too proud, and you were foolish. You set the ticket on the table. The paper feels heavier than it is. Cadence closing, evening arithmetic. As night falls you sit by the fire with a small ledger. The candle flickers, casting long shadows. You count coins, a few shillings, some pence. You write the figures neatly, though the sums are small. The sound of the pen scratching fills the room. The fire burns low, the coal nearly gone. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders, the fabric scratchy but warm. The house creaks softly, boards settling as if sighing with you. You close the ledger, fold your hands, and let the silence rest. The fire fades to ash, the lamp dims, the night grows heavier, and you drift into rest, with arithmetic still whispering at the edge of dreams. The rules of society. The morning begins as it often does, with silence and with fabric. The curtains are drawn, the fire is coaxed to life with the last cinders of coal, and the kettle is set to boil. Yet today, as you sip thin tea, you find yourself thinking less of the fire, and more of the rules that govern your every motion. Widowhood in Victorian England is not simply a private sorrow, it is a public performance, guided by codes, manuals, and the ceaseless observations of neighbors. The rules are not written in law, yet they bind more tightly than statutes. They are whispered in parlors, printed in etiquette books, and judged in the butcher's shop. Each step you take, each garment you wear, each word you speak is measured against them. Some are simple, some are burdensome, and some are quietly ignored, but all together they shape your days. The 8 rules of proper mourning. You recall the etiquette manuals, their pages edged with certainty. They prescribe in calm and absolute tones how a widow must conduct herself. You recite them in your mind, like commandments. Wear deep mourning for 1 year and 1 day, gowns of dull black bombazine, veils of crepe, gloves of matte kid leather. Half mourning may follow for 6 months. Lavender, grey or mauve may be introduced, but only gradually. Jewelry must be jet, onyx, or hairwork. Gold, pearls or bright stones are forbidden. Social invitations must be declined during full mourning. Dinners, dances, and amusements are unseemly. Correspondence must be written on black-edged stationery. Replies must be brief and restrained. Public demeanor must be solemn. No loud laughter, no visible gaiety, no excessive conversation. Remarriage must not be considered until mourning concludes. To wed too soon is scandal. Children and household must also observe mourning. Even servants may be dressed in black. The rules are presented as though universal, yet historians remind us they were not always obeyed. Poor widows shortened mourning, rich widows extended it, and many adjusted according to circumstance. Still, to ignore them entirely was to invite censure. Myth and reality. The myth is that every widow followed these rules precisely, stepping through grief like dancers through a choreographed ritual. The reality is different. Records show widows in factories wearing black aprons, but little else, because bombazine was too costly. Others wore mourning for decades, not from etiquette but from personal choice or convenience. Black was practical and did not show soot. Queen Victoria's lifelong mourning shaped the myth most powerfully. Her black dresses became the model, though her resources far exceeded those of ordinary women. Newspapers praised her constancy, but ordinary widows quietly chose what they could afford. Mrs. Finch's whisper. Of course, rules alone are not enough. They must be enforced by observation. Miss Finch, your neighbor has appointed herself the guardian of propriety. This morning as you step to the grocer's, you see her at her window, lips pursed. Later you hear her voice in the shop. Did you see? Her gloves were not entirely matte. They caught the light just a little, quite improper. Her whispers spread like smoke. They reach ears that do not care, yet still they linger. The rules of society are not written only in books. They are written in the gaze of neighbors like Mrs. Finch. Cousin Edwin's advice. Cousin Edwin, naturally, has his own commentary. His letter this week is longer than usual, his ink sprawling. Dearest cousin, you must remember that society judges widows more harshly than any other. To follow the rules is to maintain respect. Still, one must not be rigid. If you wish to shorten your mourning by a month or 2, I should not object. Appearances are everything after all. His words contradict themselves. He insists on rules, then suggests bending them. His advice is less about your comfort and more about his own sense of propriety. You fold the letter and place it aside, another piece of paper heavier than its weight. Small dilemmas. The rules sound clear, but life seldom is. Each day presents its quiet dilemmas. An invitation arrives from the vicar's wife for tea. Do you decline as mourning dictates, or accept, fearing to appear cold? Your gown frays at the hem. Do you mend it with black thread, preserving propriety, or patch with what cloth you have, risking notice? A neighbor greets you cheerfully in the street. Do you respond with solemn quiet as etiquette demands, or return the greeting warmly, as kindness urges? None of these choices are urgent, yet each weighs upon you. The rules do not account for kindness, poverty, or weariness. They only prescribe
procedural detailing. Dressing for half mourning. You imagine the day, months from now, when half mourning begins. The manuals prescribe a careful process. Step by step, retire the full crepe veil, replacing it with a shorter version, worn only outdoors. Introduce lavender or grey into accessories, gloves, ribbons or shawls. Replace dull jet jewelry with pearls, but only modest ones. Gowns may be of silk or wool, but still subdued, with no bright patterns. Gradually, over 6 months, return to ordinary colours, never too suddenly. The transition itself is ritual, as though grief could be measured by shades of cloth. The social calendar. In Victorian towns, calendars turned not only on seasons but on mourning. Invitations were offered and withdrawn, depending on whether a widow was in full or half mourning. You find yourself wondering, should you attend the church bazaar when half mourning arrives? Will Mrs. Finch raise her eyebrows if you do so too soon? Historians note that many widows shortened mourning, quietly adjusting to their needs. Yet society's eye often remembered the book more than the reality. Cadence closing. Evening reflection. As evening falls, You sit by the fire, shawl around your shoulder. The flames hiss softly, casting light across the room. On the table lies an etiquette manual. Its pages stern, its voice calm. You close it, though the words remain in your mind. The house is silent, save for the ticking clock and the faint groan of beam. The rules linger, invisible yet binding, like threads drawn tightly around you. You fold your hands, breathe slowly, and let the silence rest. The fire softens to embers, the lamp hums faintly, the night grows still, and you drift once more into rest. The rules of society echoing softly, like whispers you cannot quite silence. Companionship and isolation. You begin the day as you often do, with silence. The house is still, the curtains drawn, the fire coaxed reluctantly to light. The sound of the kettle hissing is the first voice you hear, the faintest sigh of water beginning to warm. You pour a small measure of tea into the pot, leaves already used once before, and the liquid that fills your cup is thin, more shadow than substance. You hold it in your hands for warmth as much as for taste. The flavor is faint, bitter at the edges, but it lingers enough to remind you that the ritual itself is the comfort. The quiet stretches across the house, yet it is not the comforting quiet of solitude freely chosen. It is the echoing stillness of absence. Widowhood brings with it not only loss, but a hollowing of sound. Footsteps that once matched your own are gone. Chairs sit empty at the table. The very walls seem to breathe more slowly. The solitary evenings are the most difficult. You sit by the fire, lamp lit, shawl drawn around your shoulders. The flame hums softly, the wick flickering against the glass chimney. You hear the creak of the chair as you shift, the faint rustle of your gown's fabric. These are the only sounds, save for the occasional crack of coal. Your hands occupy themselves with sewing. The needle pierces, the thread slides, the fabric folds. The rhythm is steady, a quiet music against silence. You mend not because it is necessary, though it is, but because the repetition steadies the mind. The scent of cloth and faint starch rises as you fold the finished seam. Now and then, you read from a small volume, religious tracts perhaps, or a borrowed novel. The words move slowly, the print faint in lamplight. You read not for plot, for stories are too bright, but for cadence, for the steady turn of phrases. The book closes with a soft thump, and silence returns. The myth of lifelong solitude. Society paints widows as solitary creatures, draped in black for the rest of their day. Queen Victoria's lifelong mourning reinforced the image, an eternal widow, a sovereign wrapped in shadow. Yet historians remind us the reality was different. Many widows remarried, sometimes within months, sometimes after years. Others formed companionship with fellow widows, gathering in sewing circles, or reading societies. Some took in lodgers, exchanging privacy for presents. The myth of endless solitude comforted those who saw widowhood as noble sacrifice. The reality was that companionship in some form often returned. The visit of Mrs. Finch. One afternoon, there is a knock at your door. You open it to find Mrs. Finch, shawl tight, cheeks pink from the cold. She smiles, though the smile is more inquisitive than kind. "I thought you might want company," she says, stepping inside before you can reply. She sits heavily in the chair nearest the fire, her geranium-scented shawl filling the air. She speaks at once, her words tumbling, about the butcher's wife, about the vicar's sermon, about the impropriety of a widow attending market without gloves. Her voice fills the silence, though it does not soothe. She means well, or so she claims, but her companionship is not restful. You nod, you murmur, you let her speak. Her words echo in the room, like the fire's crackle, constant, insistent, not entirely welcome. When she leaves at last, the silence returns thicker than before, yet even you must admit, the hours passed more quickly. Cousin Edwin's observations. Cousin Edwin writes again. His letter begins with sympathy, though it quickly shifts. "I hear," he writes, "that a certain gentleman of the parish has expressed admiration for your steadfastness. It would not be improper, I think, for a widow to receive such notice in due time." The implication hangs heavy. Courtship, remarriage, companionship of a different kind. You fold the letter with a sigh. The ink is pompous, the words self-satisfied, yet the thought lingers. To remarry is not unthinkable. It is simply complicated. Society permits it after mourning, yet it also whispers about widows who accept too soon. A dilemma forms quietly. Is companionship worth the weight of judgment? Tea with the reading circle. In some towns, widows formed circles, meeting weekly to read aloud, to share tea, to stitch together. You imagine joining such a gathering. The sound of pages turning, the murmurs of women's voices, the clink of cups on saucer. Not laughter, not gaiety, but steady companionship. Yet to step into such a circle would mean leaving the safety of your own silence. It would mean conversation, observation, comparison. Would Mrs. Finch approve, or would she whisper that you sought distraction too soon? The choice is yours, but you linger on it, uncertain. Procedural detail, brewing tea for two. You imagine too what it would be to brew tea for another. The steps feel almost ceremonial. Warm the pot with a little boiling water, swirling it slowly before pouring out. Place the leaves carefully, 1 spoon per person, and 1 for the pot. Pour water gently, watching steam rise, letting the leaves unfurl. Cover with a cozy, letting it steep, never rushing. Pour into cups, milk added last, sugar if fortune allows. The sound of pouring, the faint aroma of leaves, the warmth of cups passed from hand to hand. The ritual becomes more than sustenance, it becomes communion. The dilemma of suitors, it happens sometimes subtly. A neighbor greets you too warmly, lingers too long in conversation. The butcher offers extra scraps with your purchase, eyes kind, voice careful. The vicar asks after your health more than once. None of this is improper, yet all of it is noticeable. Do you encourage such kindness, or retreat into silence? To accept company might ease loneliness. To accept too quickly might invite whispers. To decline might preserve dignity, yet deepen isolation. Victorian widows often walked this narrow path, their choices measured in glances and pauses. Its glow is steady, casting shadows across the parlor. The fire hisses low, the coals nearly spent. You sit in the chair, shawl wrapped close, hands folded in your lap. The house is silent again, though echoes of voices linger. Miss Finch's chatter, Cousin Edwin's inked advice, the imagined murmurs of a reading circle. The lamp hums, the fire sighs, the night gathers around you, and you drift once more into rest, caught between companionship and solitude, the two threads of widowhood woven tightly together. The children and the next generation. You wake to the sound of small footsteps. The floorboards creak in a rhythm that is lighter, quicker than your own. It is the rhythm of children, restless, even in the quiet house of mourning. The day begins not with silence, but with voices, questions, and the rustle of cloth being pulled over shoulders. Widowhood with children is never entirely still. It is softened and burdened all at once by the presence of the next generation. The morning air is cool, and the kettle takes longer than usual to boil. You pour tea for yourself and warm milk for the children. The steam rises, carrying the faint scent of coal smoke and scorched bread. You cut slices thin, butter spread sparingly, and place them on small plates. The children eat quickly, crumbs scattering across the table. Their chatter fills the room, though it falls quiet when your gaze lingers too long. They know this is not an ordinary household anymore. The routine of school mornings, Victorian mornings with children, are governed by routine. You move through them step by step, careful and deliberate. Lay out the clothing, shirts washed thin by repeated scrubbing, pinafores stiff from line drying, boots worn but polished. Inspect for neatness. Collars must be straight, hair brushed flat, hands wiped clean. Society judges children by the state of their dress as much as by their manners. Prepare the satchels, a slate, a stub of chalk, a primer if one can be afforded, ink-stained cloth wrapped around a pen to keep it from spilling, tie scarves and button coat. The wind outside is sharp, and children are quick to feel the cold. You send them out the door with a blessing. Watch as their small figures disappear down the lane, their voices carrying faintly back before fading into distance. The sound of their boots on the cobblestones is brief, but it echoes long after. The house seems emptier for their absence, yet lighter too as silence returns. Myth and reality of schooling. Etiquette manuals and reformers often spoke as though every child should be schooled properly, learning letters and numbers, hymns and histories. The myth was of universal education, dutiful and orderly. The reality was less simple. Charity schools took in many children of widows, but places were limited. Some children went barefoot in all weather, carrying slates wrapped in rags. Others stayed home, working small tasks to help feed the family. Records from workhouse schools describe rows of children reciting lessons by rote, their stomachs empty, their eyes heavy with fatigue. You think of your own children. Do you keep them in school, hoping education will shape their futures, or do you keep them near where their hands can mend, sew, or fetch? Either choice carries its own weight. The afternoon return. When the children return, the house fills again with sound. Boots are scuffed, coats hung crooked,
satchels dropped by the door. They speak at once, words tumbling over one another about lessons, about games, about the teacher's stern fate. Their energy is boundless, though tinged with hesitation when they glance at you, gauging whether their chatter is welcome. You guide them gently towards chores. One fetches water from the pump, the bucket clanking. Another helps fold laundry, the fabric rough in small hands. They resist, as children do, but they obey eventually. You supervise quietly, the fire hissing as it swallows another piece of coal. The watchful eyes of neighbors. Mrs. Finch notices everything, of course. She remarks to another woman in the grocer's that your youngest wore stockings with a hole at the knee. She whispers that your eldest was seen laughing too loudly in the lane, as though laughter itself were improper in mourning. Her words are sharp, but her interest is constant. She sees the children not only as themselves, but as reflections of you. Society places its weight on widows doubly when children are involved. A well-mannered child proves you are respectable. A careless child proves you are failing. Each scuffed boot or crooked bow is more than a small flaw. It is a judgment. Cousin Edwin's advice. Cousin Edwin's letter arrives, as it always does, sprawling across 2 pages. This time, it is about the children. You must consider their education carefully, he writes. A boy should be apprenticed at once, lest idleness spoil him. A girl should be trained in needlework, for it will be her only asset. I speak with experience, though I have raised none myself. His ink is thick, his tone pompous. You sigh softly, fold the paper and set it aside. Advice from afar is easy. It costs nothing. Gentle dilemmas. Each day you face small questions that feel larger than they appear. Should you send the eldest to work, earning wages but losing education? Finch's whispers. Or keep them indoors, stifling their laughter? Should you discipline quickly, preserving order, or allow leniency, remembering that grief weighs on them too? None of these choices have clear answers. Widowhood is as much about navigating these daily currents as about wearing black. Procedural detail, bedtime routine. Night brings another ritual. The children must be readied for bed, step by step. Remove boots, setting them neatly by the door, though they rarely stay neat. Wash faces and hands in cool water. Soap faint but sharp. The children protest, but you insist. Fold garments for another day's wear, smoothing wrinkles with small hands. Say prayers aloud, voices overlapping, some mumbled, some clear. Tuck them beneath blankets, the fabric scratchy but warm, and smooth the hair back from their foreheads. The room smells of soap and wool, faintly damp from washing. The children settle slowly, wriggling, whispering to one another before sleep. At last, silence falls. Their breathing becomes even, soft, a rhythm that fills the space like the ticking of the clock. Myth and reality of inheritance. You recall how people assume children of widows are provided for. Pensions, inheritances, trust funds. The myth comforts those outside the household. The reality is harsher. Many widows relied on parish charity to clothe and feed their children. Some children were sent to relatives, scattered like seeds. Others entered workhouses with their mothers, separated by iron gates and schedule. You glance at your own children, asleep, their faces peaceful for now. You think of the fragility of their future. Every decision you make echoes into their lives. Cadence closing, nights quiet. The house is silent again. The children breathe softly in their sleep. The fire has burned low, the embers glowing faintly. You sit alone by the lamp, shawl wrapped close, ledger open. Coins are counted, sums recorded. The pen scratches quietly. At last, you close the book. You glance toward the children's room, where silence is a comfort, not a voice. You breathe slowly, deeply, letting the stillness settle. The lamp dims, the embers fade, the night gathers its cloak, and you drift into rest, with the sound of children's breathing still lingering in your mind. Myths of eternal mourning. The morning begins with the same ritual as always. You stir the ashes, coax the fire, set the kettle on to boil. Yet today your thoughts do not linger on the hiss of water, or the thin taste of reused tea leaves. They drift instead to the garments folded in your chest, the endless black of bombazine, the veil that has shadowed your days, the gloves that separate you from the touch of the world. They drift to a question that grows heavier with time. Must mourning last forever? Society answers differently depending on who speaks. The etiquette manuals declare with certainty, a year and a day of deep mourning, 6 months of half mourning, then a gradual return to color. Neighbors whisper with sharper tongues. Some say too little is disrespectful. Others say too much is morbid. History complicates it further, for Queen Victoria herself never set aside her widow's garb. She became in the public mind the eternal mourner. her black dresses shaping expectations long after. You sit by the fire, shawl tight around your shoulders, and you think of these rules and myths, of what is expected and what is real. The shadow of a queen. When Prince Albert died in 1861, Queen Victoria withdrew into mourning so absolute that it reshaped the nation's imagination. For decades she wore black, shunning public appearances, insisting that her sorrow remain visible at all times. Newspapers chronicled her devotion, praising her fidelity, her constancy. She became the model widow, though her circumstances bore little resemblance to those of ordinary women. The myth spread quickly, that a widow must wear black forever, that to smile too soon was betrayal, that to return to society was improper. In truth, only a sovereign could afford such permanence. Ordinary widows needed to work, to remarry, to live. Yet the myth clung stubbornly, whispered in parlors, printed in columns, measured in glances across the pews of churches. The reality of transition. Most widows did not, could not, mourn eternally. Instead they moved through stages, each marked by clothing as much as by feeling. The process was procedural, almost mechanical, as though grief could be folded and stored like garments. Step by step, moving from deep mourning. A shorter veil is worn outdoors only, the face more visible, the breathing freer. The gown, the stiff bombazine, is replaced by softer black silks or wool, still dull, still modest but lighter. The gloves, matte black gloves, may be exchanged for grey or lavender. The change is small but neighbors notice. The jewelry, jet brooches give way to pearls, or simple silver. Locks of hair, once worn in pendants, may be tucked away. The colors, after 6 months, lavender, grey and mauve creep in, at first in ribbons or trims, then in full garments. The return, at last, after 18 months, ordinary dress may return. Browns, blues, even muted greens, yet many never returned entirely. The rules suggest precision, but reality was softer. Some widows shortened mourning, others extended it. Many chose convenience. Black fabric was practical, hiding soot and wear. Some wore mourning for years, not out of sentiment but because it was easier. Mrs. Finch's commentary. Mrs. Finch notices, of course. She notices when a widow down the lane appears in grey gloves, before a year has passed. She whispers in the greengrocer's, "Far too soon, don't you think? Not even 12 months, and already lavender." She clucks her tongue, shakes her head, and carries the news like a parcel from one doorstep to another. You know she will notice when you change too. If your veil shortens, if your gown lightens, if your ribbon carries even the faintest shade of color, she will and her whispers will ripple outward, reaching ears that never even see you. Cousin Edwin's opinion. Cousin Edwin in his weekly letter writes, "Do not allow yourself to linger in black longer than society requires. Melancholy is respectable, but morbidity is not. Appearances must be preserved, but cheer must eventually return. A widow too long in mourning risks appearing eccentric." His words are confident, though his experience is none. He advises as though he were society itself, though he sits miles away, his pen scratching smugly. You fold the letter, place it aside, and smile faintly at its pompous tone. His advice weighs less than Mrs. Finch's whispers, but it adds to the chorus nonetheless.
Gentle dilemmas. The decision is not simple. You weigh it each day in small choices. Do you fold away the heavy veil and risk Mrs. Finch's tongue, or keep wearing it though it smothers your breath? Do you add lavender ribbon to your bonnet, or wait until the year and a day is complete? Do you store black garments in a chest, ready for future need, or do you put them away forever, choosing to face the world in color again? None of these choices feel urgent, yet each carries weight. Mourning is not only for yourself, it is for the eyes that watch you. The wardrobe ritual. One afternoon, you open the wardrobe and face the garments inside. Black gowns hang in a row, heavy, unyielding. The veil rests folded on a shelf, its creases sharp. The sight itself is oppressive, as though the garments breathe their own heavy air. You begin the process of sorting, a ritual as slow as prayer. Lift each gown, shake it gently, fold it with care. Place the deepest mourning garments, those of stiffest bombazine, at the bottom of the chest. Set aside lighter black garments for continued use. Fold the veil, pressing its crepe carefully, and store it beneath tissue. Place lavender ribbon beside the chest, a sign of what may come next. The room smells of fabric, starch, and faint coal smoke. The sound of cloth folding fills the silence. You sit back, hands resting on your lap, and breathe slowly. Myth versus reality. Remarriage. Another myth persists, that widows bound by eternal mourning never remarried. In truth, many parish records, census lists, and family letters reveal second marriages common, often within a few years, sometimes within months. Poverty urged it, loneliness encouraged it, and society permitted it, so long as appearances were observed fair. You think of Cousin Edwin's hints, of neighbors' glances, of the faint possibility of companionship. The myth says to remain alone. Reality suggests otherwise. Cadence closing, night's decision deferred. As evening falls, you sit by the fire once more. The flames crackle softly, shadows rising against the curtains. The garments are folded, the veil stored, the ribbons waiting. Yet, no final decision is made. The choice lingers, deferred as so many choices are. The fire hisses as coal shifts. The lamp hums faintly. The house breathes its slow, steady rhythm, and you drift into rest. The myths of eternal mourning, pressing softly at the edge of your dreams, unresolved, but no longer heavy. Small comforts and quiet joys. The morning begins quietly, as most mornings do. The curtains are drawn against the pale light, and the fire is coaxed to life with a few small lumps of coal. The kettle sighs on the trivet, and steam curls upward in thin thread. The house is still, but your thoughts wander toward the few things that soften its silence. The small comforts that remain, the quiet joys that do not disturb morning, but gently accompany it. Widowhood, even in the stiff codes of Victorian England, allows moments of gentleness. You sip your tea, weak but warm, and let the rhythm of the fire settle into your breathing. These comforts may be modest, but they create a rhythm that carries you through. They are not gaiety, nor amusement, but slow rituals that soothe without scandal. The comfort of sewing. You begin with sewing. The needle glints faintly in lamplight. The thread slips between fingers. The fabric sighs as it is pierced. The repetition itself is the solace. Each stitch feels like a heartbeat. Small, steady, unhurried. Step by step, the task proceeds. The tareth the needle with patience. The black cotton thin and slightly frayed. Fold the fabric neatly, aligning edges with care. Insert the needle, pull the thread through, listen to the quiet rasp of cloth. Smooth the seam with your palm, pressing it flat. Stack the mended garments in careful order, as though neatness itself were comfort. The smell of cloth, faint starch, and the tang of soap from recent washing lingers. The chair creaks beneath you. The lamp hums. Sewing fills hours without emptiness. And when at last you set down the needle, you feel as though the day has been steadied. The garden beyond the window. When the afternoon light softens, you step into the small garden. The air is cool, damp with last night's mist. The soil smells rich. Moss clings to the stone path, and the faint rustle of leaves fills the stillness. Gardens were often small in Victorian towns, yet even the smallest patch could hold herbs and flowers. You bend to tend them, hands brushing soil, gloves gathering damp. Procedural care of a Victorian herb garden. Loosen the soil with a small fork, turning gently to release dampness. Pull weeds slowly, their roots resisting before yielding. Water sparingly, carrying the tin pail from the pump, letting drops sink into dark earth. Trim herbs carefully, gathering sprigs of thyme, mint or lavender. Tie them with string, to be hung in the kitchen, scenting the air faintly for weeks. The smell of herbs rises. Sharp mint, woody thyme, sweet lavender. You breathe it in, slower than usual, as though the fragrance itself were a kind of medicine. Myth and reality. The widow's joy. The myth insists widows were joyless, living in houses draped in black, never smiling, never laughing. But reality, recorded in diaries and letters, suggests otherwise. Widows found joy in gardens, in reading, in pets, in the small rhythm of daily life. Some laughed quietly with children. Others found solace in tending flowers. Joy was not forbidden. It was simply meant to be modest, subdued, folded into quiet corners of the day. You sit on the garden bench, the wood damp beneath you, and let the air cool your face. The echo of morning is still there, but it does not cancel out small joy. Miss Finch and the lavender. Mrs. Finch appears at the fence, watering her geraniums with a can too large for her. She leans forward, her eyes sharp, her lips pursed. Lavender wards off gossip, you know, she remarks, glancing at your small herb patch. Though I dare say it never seems to work for some. Her words are wrapped in advice, but edged with amusement. She watches as you tie a small bundle of lavender, and you can almost hear her planning to tell the grocer that you allow yourself little indulgence. Even comfort becomes subject to observation. Still you smile faintly beneath your veil. Perhaps lavender cannot ward off gossip, but it makes the house smell sweet. The gentle company of pets. Some widows kept pets,
quiet companions in houses otherwise silent, a cat curling by the fire, purring like the steady hum of the lamp, a small dog following steps from room to room, nails clicking against the boards, even a bird in a cage, singing faintly in the morning light. You imagine, or perhaps remember, such company. The warmth of fur beneath your palm, the steady rhythm of breathing beside you, the flutter of wings in a sunbeam. These are small joys, modest, but powerful in their constancy. Society might frown upon too much attachment, but within your own walls companionship is allowed. Dilemmas of comfort. Even comforts carry dilemmas. Do you spend a coin on flowers for the garden, or on bread for the table? Do you keep a cat that eats scraps you can scarcely spare, or let it go and bear the silence alone? Do you allow yourself to laugh at a child's small jest, or keep your face solemn lest Mrs. Finch remark? Each choice is small, yet each feels weighted. Widowhood is not only grief, but the constant balancing of comfort and propriety. Reading by lamplight. When evening comes, you light the lamp and take up a book. The pages smell faintly of dust and ink, the paper rough beneath your gloved fingers. You read slowly, not for story but for cadence. Words move like gentle waves, steady and soothing. You pause often, listening to the hum of the lamp, the crackle of coal, the faint creak of the house. The book rests on your lap as your eyes drift closed, then open again, then close once more. Reading is less about knowledge, and more about rhythm, the turning of pages, the soft sound of paper, the passage of time without urgency. Cousin Edwin's amusement. Cousin Edwin writes again. His letter is pompous as always. A widow must not sink into melancholy, but neither should she indulge in amusements unbefitting her station. Gentle diversions are acceptable, excessive cheer is vulgar. He suggests reading sermons, stitching plain garments, and taking fresh air so long as one does not linger too long in company. His tone is instructional, his advice as contradictory as ever. You fold the letter, set it aside and sip your tea. You will continue to read novels if you wish. Cadence closing. The comfort of night. The fire burns low, the lamp hums faintly, the air smells of lavender from the bundle drying by the hearth. You sit back in your chair, shawl wrapped close, and breathe deep. The small comforts of the day linger, the stitches neatly sewn, the herbs gathered, the faint memory of a purring cat. They do not erase morning, but they soften its edges. They do not end solitude, but they make silence gentler. The lamp dims, the embers fade, the night grows still, and you drift once more into rest, held not only by grief, but by the quiet joys that endure beside it. Rest beyond morning. The morning comes quietly. You stir the ashes, coax a thin fire to life, and pour tea into a cup that has grown faintly chipped at the rim. The house is still yet less heavy than it once was. Time has moved on though the black gowns still hang in your wardrobe, folded neatly as though waiting. Widowhood in Victorian England is not a brief season. For many women it is the longest stage of life, stretching from youth into old age, shaping every year with its routines, its restrictions and its small freedoms. You sip your tea slowly, breathing in steam that smells faintly of smoke and damp cloth. The fire hums, the kettle ticks as it cools, and you sit with thoughts that stretch beyond morning itself. The long view of widowhood. Historians studying census records have observed the sheer number of widows in Victorian town. Pages of ledgers show rows of names, each marked widow beside occupation, or widow beside nothing at all. In some parishes, widows made up nearly 1/3 of adult women. Widowhood was not exceptional, it was ordinary. Yet society treated each widow as though her mourning were extraordinary, a performance to be watched, judged and whispered about. The myth is that widowhood is only grief. The reality is that widowhood often became a second life, different, quieter, sometimes free. A husband's absence meant hardship, yes, but also decisions made without permission. Some widows ran businesses, others managed households alone, others found new companionship. Letters, diaries and census numbers reveal them not as figures of eternal sorrow, but as women navigating life in their own ways. Mrs. Finch, one last time. Mrs. Finch remains at her window, as she has for years. Her geraniums bloom and wither in their cycles, always watered at the wrong time. Her lips purse with each season's change. Today she remarks to a neighbor, "She still wears black, you know." After all these years, some say it is devotion, others say it is stubborn. You hear of her words as you always do. They no longer sting. They have become part of the background, like the ticking of the clock, or the creak of the stair. Mrs. Finch has gossiped through your morning, your half-morning, and beyond. Her voice is steady, but it no longer directs. Cousin Edwin's last letter. Another letter arrives from Cousin Edwin. Ink sprawling, tone pompous. Dearest cousin, it begins, I hope you are well. It occurs to me that many years have now passed since your great loss. Perhaps it is time to consider what comes next. Some widows, I am told, remarry. Others retire into piety. A sensible balance must be found. I advise moderation. You fold the letter with a sigh and place it with the stack. His advice has been steady, pompous, and often contradictory, but you realize now it has become another rhythm of life, another sound that has accompanied your years. His voice too is part of the echo of widowhood. Gentle dilemmas of later years. The dilemmas change as years pass, but they do not vanish. Should you store away the black gowns, or keep wearing them out of habit? Should you remarry accepting companionship and perhaps comfort, or remain alone preserving dignity and routine? Should you spend your modest savings on bread and coal, or allow yourself flowers, books, or small comforts? Each decision is small, yet each feels significant. Widowhood is less about one great choice and more about 1,000 quiet ones, repeated day by day, year by year. The freedom of routine. There is a kind of freedom in routine. You dust the mantle, polish the glass, fold linens, tend the garden, and mend clothing. These tasks are ordinary, but they belong to you. There is no one to question, no one to approve. The house is quiet, but it is yours. You think of the small comforts that have carried you, the herbs in the garden, the lavender tied with string, the sewing done by lamplight, the sound of children breathing softly in their beds. These comforts do not erase mourning, but they outlast the passing of years. The children grow. Their boots no longer scuff the cobblestones outside the door. Their lessons become jobs. Their chatter becomes letters sent from elsewhere. You read those letters slowly, the paper soft from folding, the ink faded at edges. They write of new towns, of apprenticeships, of families of their own. You reply with careful lines, thanking them for their news, offering small advice, always written on plain paper now, no black edges remaining. The house grows quieter as their footsteps fade, yet the echoes remain. You still hear them sometimes, the rush of morning, the murmur of bedtime prayers, the laughter in the lane. The house holds these sounds even when empty. Historical reflection. Census records show widows scattered across every town, every street. Some lived with children, some with lodgers, some alone. Parish records show widows applying for coal in winter, for bread at Christmas, for charity to clothe their children. Yet others show widows running inns, keeping shops, teaching needlework, or managing farms. The myth of the eternal mourner dissolves in these numbers. Widows were everywhere, doing everything, shaping communities quietly. Historians still debate whether widowhood in Victorian England was more hardship or opportunity. Perhaps it was both. For some it meant poverty, for others independence. For all it was a stage of life that could stretch for decades. Cadence closing. The lamps of widowhood. As evening falls, you light the lamp one last time in this long account. Its glow is soft, steady, yellow against the curtain. The fire hums faintly, coals collapsing into ash. The house is quiet, but it no longer feels heavy. It feels familiar, steady, patient. You think of all the widows across England, their lamps glowing in windows, their routines unfolding. Each house is quiet, yet together they create a constellation of silent lives, steady and enduring. You breathe slowly, adjusting the shawl around your shoulders, and close your eyes. The lamp dims, the fire softens, the house sighs into stillness, and you drift into rest, carried not only by mourning, but by the long unhurried rhythm of life beyond it.